What a wonderful afternoon, morning, or evening to everyone joining us from the different parts of the globe. On behalf of the International Academy for Quality, it has been a great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Building a Culture of Excellence, What Education Can Learn from a Deming Prize Journey. I'm Ray. I'm an academician of the International Academy for Quality, and I have the privilege of serving as your host for today's session. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Today's conversation is particularly important because of the pursuit of excellence is not limited to manufacturing, to technology, or the corporate world. Excellence is fundamentally an organizational capability. And whether we are leading a global company, a university, a school, or a public institutions, many of the questions are remarkably similar. How do we create a culture where quality becomes everyone's responsibility? How do we move from isolated improvement initiatives to an organization-wide system of excellence? And perhaps most importantly, how do we make excellence sustainable even as leaders, technologies, expectations, and environments change? So these questions that sit at the heart of today's discussion. By the way, let me introduce very quickly what International Academy for Quality is all about. So IAQ was founded between 1966 and 1971 by some of the most influential pioneers in the field. Leaders such as Armand Feigenbaum, Kaoru Ishikawa, and Walter Massing came together with a vision to create a truly global body dedicated to advancing quality. So from the beginning, IAQ was built on collaboration across regions, disciplines, and industries. What makes IAQ unique is its structure. It is an independent, nonprofit, peer-elected academy, meaning membership is based on recognition by fellow experts. So this ensures that the academy represents not only credentials, but proven contributions to the advancement of quality globally. IAQ's membership is highly selective and globally representative. Academicians are invited, not self-nominated, and come from over 45 countries across Asia, the Americas, and EMEA. This diversity allows IAQ to bring together perspectives from both mature and emerging systems, creating a richer understanding of quality. IAQ operates through its global think tanks. The host for today's webinar is the Quality and Education Think Tank, by the way. So when we say global think tank, this is where members collaborate on key themes shaping the future of quality. So these think tanks influence how quality is applied across industries, governments, and institutions. It's where ideas move from theory into global impact. Beyond organizations, IAQ focuses on societal impact. Its work extends into governance, healthcare, education, sustainability, and national quality movements. The goal is clear to apply quality as a force for improving systems that matter most to people and society. Before we begin, let's align on a few simple guidelines to keep the session smooth and productive for everyone. First, please keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking to minimize background noise. Second is, feel free to use the Q&A box for your questions. We'll address as many as we can during the session. The third one is the chat box is open for your insights, for your reflections. Just keep discussions relevant and respectful. Fourth, let's maintain a professional and considerate environment for everyone. And lastly, the session is being recorded. Thank you for your cooperation, and let's make this a great session together. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Uday Mahajan. Uday is a seasoned transformation and quality leader with over 32 years of international experience in business transformation, operational excellence, and quality management across multiple industries. He currently serves as Group Vice President for Continuous Improvement at Stolt Nielsen Limited, where he leads group-wide transformation and continuous improvement initiatives. Uday is an INSEAD alumnus, a certified GE Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt and Master Trainer with additional credentials in TQM from JUSE Japan and as an EFQM assessor. Most relevant to our conversation today, Uday played a key role in the Deming Prize journey of one of the world's largest telecommunications infrastructure organizations, helping embed world-class quality in operational excellence practices. So today he will share what that journey can teach educational institutions about building a sustainable culture of quality and excellence. So ladies and gentlemen, Please join me in welcoming Mr. Uday Mahajan. So, Uday, the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you, Ray. Uh, Before I say anything more, can I just confirm that you're able to see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Assuming
Yes,
everybody
we
else
can.
can as well. So thank you very much, Ray, for that very generous introduction and for having me here, share some of the learnings that I had along the way while leading this Deming Prize journey that you spoke of. And I think what I'm trying to focus on today is basically three things, but I understand I have about 45 minutes. So before I start, I think a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who joined, because I know this is a global forum. We've got people from across the globe joining. So thank you very much for making the time. And I hope I am able to make it well worth it for all of you. Uh, I will cover three broad areas today in the next 45 odd minutes that Ray has granted me. And we'll talk about three things. One, of course, we'll talk about the Deming Prize journey that we had embarked upon and concluded successfully in 2018. Two, I think, would be a little bit about what we learned from it. Because when you receive the Deming Prize report after your examination has been successful, what you get is actually a ton of things that you need to do after you've received the prize. So it's not that your journey ends when you get the prize. In many ways, your journey actually starts when you receive the prize. So there's a lot of lessons learned, some of which I would like to share here. And then, of course, there is a common ground that links what we learned to education as an industry and even for educational institutions. So I'll try and draw out some of those learnings, from what we learned in the journey. And so I'll jump straight in and get into the first part, which is the Deming Prize journey itself and what we did, and more importantly, why did we go about setting our foot towards the Deming Prize in the first place. So I think it's important to mention here a little bit of background about the company that I worked for, in which we got the Deming Prize. And this was a company called Indus Towers, which is one of which was and continues to be one of the world's largest telecom infrastructure companies. Now, it's important to understand what a telecom infrastructure company really means in a common, man's language. So basically, telecom, as we know it, is divided into two broad infrastructure portions. One is what we term as active infrastructure, which is really the signals that get transmitted from the various towers to our mobile phones. That's what we refers to as the active infrastructure. And then there is a backend that makes that happen. That's the steel, cement, concrete that's there, the power supply that is there, the real estate that is there on which the tower stands, from which the signals get transmitted. And maintenance of that tower, the space, and the shelter, etc., that I'll talk a little bit more about later, is referred to usually as passive infrastructure. So obviously, both the infrastructure are important because for the signals to get transmitted, it is important for us to have an up and about passive infrastructure as well. So Indus Towers is a company which is there in the passive infrastructure space. And with that background, maybe I'll get into my first slide, which is really about how did Indus Towers get formed. Now, Indus Towers actually, interestingly, was a joint venture when it got formed in 2007 uh, of three big telecom companies who were active in the space at that point in time. And what they realized was that having three different towers meant having three times the capex that needs to be invested into having a passive infrastructure, whereas they could actually use one tower and yet continue to transmit their active signals from that tower and continue to compete at the front end. So this, by the way, is a Harvard business case study as well of shared infrastructure, and that is how Indus Towers came into being. And interestingly, it was a time when soon after the crossover of data and voice were happening in the world. So if you remember some of the good old days, when the only reason why we used a phone was to talk to each other. Well, data came into being in the mid 90s more and more. And therefore, with data coming in, there was a huge surge in demand of infrastructure, telecom, signals and availability across the world. Now, India, this company, of course, is based out of India, and now they've extended operations to Africa as well. But this company at that time was based in India, and India is a very large country. with very geographically diverse locations and locales. And we had about 125,000 towers at that time, spread across almost 3.5 million kilometers of footprint. So you can imagine having almost 125,000 factories spread across the country, which was wanting to embark upon an improvement journey. So that's a very brief background of the business that we were in at that point in time, and the reason why it came into being. Moving on, I'll talk a little bit more about the passive infrastructure bit that I spoke of and how tower companies make money. Really, tower companies end up building a tower, and they have some sort of a power source that powers the tower for it to allow the transmissions to take place. And of course, we have the landlord whose site we have. So basically, there's a space that's provided by the infrastructure company. There is a tower that is provided by the infrastructure company, and there is power that gets that powers up the tower for the signals to get transmitted. So the broad scope of a tower infrastructure company is this. And how they make money is they obviously, like a hotel, they charge rent to whoever wants to sit on the tower and operate from there. So that's the broad business model. And I'll just move straight into, to give you a few pictures here for those of you who are not familiar with the tower industry as to what you would have seen in the countryside in your respective areas, towers that look something like this many a times. And some of the equipments that are there inside the towers, which obviously most of us would not be exposed to. But I think the towers are something that dot the landscape across the entire world. And you would have seen some versions of these towers in your respective places as well. And of course, now let's come to the real, the meat of the story, which is why did we use what prompted us to start using TQM? So we had a combination of three or four challenges at that point in time. One, like I said, telecom infrastructure was growing exponentially, and there was a rapid growth zone for us. Customers were extremely demanding, and we had to make sure that we coped up to their expectations. Two, we were a $2 billion baby born on day one, expected to start delivering results almost immediately. Three, as I mentioned earlier, we were geographically extremely diverse in our footprint, and that had its own set of challenges. And then, of course, to top it all, our technology has to run in sync with our customer's technology. So if the customer is deciding to use a particular kind of gadget or tool for them to start transmitting the signals more efficiently, we've got to make sure at the back end that our equipments are able to feed that equipment that the customer wants to drive. And technology advancements were happening, exponentially at that point in time. And to double it, we had to also keep pace with those advancing technologies which the customers were adopting. So it was a very interesting space that we were in 2011 when we decided that, okay, we need to do something about this confusion. We need to put some method to the madness. And we started to evaluate various models that existed across the globe. And to be honest, we had no bias towards Deming or to TQM. We looked at EFQM, we looked at the Deming Prize, TQM as a philosophy, and we looked at Malcolm Baldrige and a few others that came to our platform. And the real reason why we thought and all of them had their merits. They were all great models, and they continue to be. And the reason why we thought we'd go in for TQM was because that seemed to be the oldest existing, and also one that allowed international recognition. And simple reason why we chose to adopt TQM as a philosophy. And we shifted to that philosophy in 2011. Now, as any company would do, the first thing is obviously we're very serious about adopting it. And the first thing is, okay, let's learn a little bit more about what TQM really means, because none of us really had that exposure. And we decided the first thing is that we need to start sending our people to the place where we can learn TQM. And we all know that TQM has its roots in Japan. And the JUSE, which is the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers, is the body that actually coordinates the entire Deming Prize, recommendations and recognitions. And they have seminars that run through the year. I don't know about this year, but normally they have two seminars on TQM that run either in summers or there's one more in winters. The one in summers is a little bit longer, where you have 5 days of classes, and you have then some very interesting factory visits where you learn on the ground how TQM really gets implemented from some of the successful journeys that have happened in the past. And therefore, I was being the one heading that journey, sent off to Japan in July of 2013, where I attended the first seminar. And you can see the brilliant Dr. Kano in that picture on the left side and on the right side as well. I went to the seminar twice, probably one of the very few people who had the luxury of being there twice. But I learned a lot. And what Indus started doing after that was they started investing in leadership, going to Japan and learning about TKM every year. So we used to send 1 to 2 of our top leaders to Japan and attend these seminars and come back, really appreciating how this whole thing works. And I think that is a very important step in our journey early in the days. Moving on, because we started to learn from the seminars we attended, we thought it's important for us to create an Indus TQM framework, which really meant, and the beauty about TQM is that TQM does not dictate, in black and white as to exactly what you need to do. And they're very flexible in terms of how you'd like to use some of the methodologies while the underlying principles remain the same. And we learned about this boat model from Dr. Kano. And we thought we'd adopt something similar at Indus, looking at the challenges that we had. We thought we'd make 6 pillars on which we would base the TKM philosophy at Indus. And the first pillar, because of the changing shifts in the overall, scenario, given the challenges we had, was how do we make our strategy nimble? And therefore, policy management was the first pillar that we adopted. It would allow us to change tracks as our customers did with the evolving things around us, and that is the first pillar that we thought we would embrace. Now, while strategies keep changing, it's important the company keeps running, and to keep the company running, the second pillar had to be daily management, and we called it something else. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but we had daily management as the second pillar. Now, the third thing was how do we involve everybody in the journey? So the third pillar automatically became involving all our employees, and we called it total employee involvement. Uh, then there was this, like I mentioned, we had this challenge of, uh, multiple functions trying to get to quality at the same time. And we realized, when we did initial studies, that Deming applications are not even accepted if you don't have a standard quality assurance framework in place for the company. So that was the first problem that we had to actually set up a QA framework early in the days when we started to adopt TQM. So the fourth pillar became that. And of course, given the fast moving technologies that we had around us, it was important for us to fall in line with a very, very robust new product development framework, which was number 5 pillar. And of course, when all these things come together, we all will come across problems. We will see gaps in the way we work. And therefore, having a problem solving framework is an important part of driving this journey successfully. And we called it by different names, but really it was about problem solving. So these were the 6 pillars: policy management, uh, daily management, total employee involvement, QA framework, new product development, and a problem solving framework. Now, I spoke about some of the challenges that we had. I've spoken about some of the framework elements that we adopted. I do want to take a minute to share with you how these two came together and what solved for which problem. Of course, I mean, I can talk about this for days on end. It's been part of my life for many, many years. But since this is restricted to just 45 minutes, I will try and keep it very, very short and crisp. Uh, so I spoke about the telecom infrastructure industry, which was evolving at a very, very quick pace. The challenges that we had were, of course, the fast growth pace and the fact that we were an extremely partner dependent or a vendor dependent organization. We had, to give you an example, to give you a sense of the scale I'm talking about, we had like about uh, less than 3,000 employees on roles, but we had close to 30,000 partners that we were working with. Partners being feet on the ground, and that meant a lot of diversity when it came to the geographical spread and the partner dependencies. Uh, so therefore, the pillar that came in was, of course, new product development, which help us create commercially viable products in line with what our customers were trying to do. And the quality assurance framework made sure that uh, our partners and our people were talking the same language, and we were trying to get things first time right. And we started to talk about how do we create a zero defect culture, and that resonated very well with people on the ground and our partners as well. We've spoken about total employee involvement. I think the good thing about our journey was that uh, everybody who was involved, was passionately involved in it. And of course, there's a change management element that goes into it. But at the end of the day, when we had the examination, uh, all the people who participated, many of them had fresh suits stitched for that event. It was so close to their hearts. So people were really involved in that journey. The second challenge that we had was geographically wide coverage. We had distributed base of employees across the country, and I spoke about the size of the country being 3.3 million square kilometers, which is huge. And India is not, for all of you who haven't been to India or haven't seen India, India is a country with very, very diverse topography. We've got desert, we've got forests, we've got seas, we've got mountains, we've got places that take 2 days of walking to reach to, where we had towers. So it was not easy to run his operations across this geographically wide coverage. So what helped us was policy management. We were able to make sure that we provide one direction to everybody. And of course, daily management, and I'll talk about an example that later. How we managed to bring about a consistency in the way our ground staff work, which was about 70% of the 3,000 people that I spoke as part of the company. And the third challenge, of course, for all companies is high customer expectations, rightfully so. And that meant we got to get past unpredictable outcomes that they were experiencing, and we got to make sure that our service protocols are absolutely intact. And for that, we drove a lot of improvement projects. Talk about the volumes in a while, and daily management again here played a key role for improving productivity around field operations. So that's a quick snapshot of how the whole thing was, the orchestra played, as I call it. But in the interest of time, I'll just move on, save questions for the end. And of course, at that time, digitalization and automation continue to be very, very strong bedrocks for us. Now, this happened over a span of 6 to 7 years. So this is a very, very quick summary. So let me just break this up into three broad time sections and tell you how and when we went about doing what. So we had the initial phase, the development phase, and the consolidation phase. And of course, in that, we broke this up into two parts. And that middle that you see on the far right of the slide is the one that we actually got. It's the actual picture of the actual middle that we got in 2018 November when we went to Tokyo for the ceremony. But we said we're going to have major objectives that we'll define as part of each of the phases, and we will have key strategies which will help us achieve those objectives. And the first phase till about 2014 was the phase in which we went about launching our improvement project programs. We launched our idea incubator, which was really where people could ideate, and those would then lead to projects potentially. We also created the online repository for ourselves to make sure we have one version of the truth. Because earlier we had multiple manuals people had of different versions, so there was no standard that existed to do our operations. And to make it fun, we also introduced the reward program early, which was based on what we were trying to focus on in that timeline. And the good thing about the scorecard was that it created healthy competition amongst all the divisions. We used to call them circles, and everybody then came forward and started to participate. Then I think we this was more about creating a pull and creating a culture. The next was about how do we provide structure to the whole thing, and that's when we launched our field QCC programs, and that was a very, very interesting topic that was led by the field staff. We launched routine work management, which was essentially daily management packaged with routine work management, because daily management in the service industry in our space did not make sense. A lot of things were done on a routine basis, sometimes on a weekly basis, sometimes on a monthly basis. So it was not resonating well to call it daily management. So the principle remained the same, but we called it routine work management. We also strengthened our analytics program by introducing the Black Belt project. So basically, we had more DOEs, more statistical quality control kind of work happening in both departments, and some problems being solved in the real statistical sense. And of course, policy deployment framework that we began to deploy early after 2014. And the last phase of this journey was really about sharpening some of these things that we put together and making the whole model come together. So how do we match our customer expectations to business outcomes? How do our employees get sensitized to it? And our partners start to support us. And that's where the NPD framework was revised. We refreshed our QF framework, and we introduced process compliance programs. So this is a very broad flavor of things that went into this over time. Of course, this is a tip of the iceberg. There was a lot of heavy lifting that happened under this as well. But I think, in the interest of time, this is probably a good level of information to share in this forum today. And of course, we got the prize in 2018. I'll come to that in a bit. Uh, Moving on, just to give you a sense of the numbers. And yeah, the one thing that we realized here was that the pace of change in an organization uh, is not standard. Every organization takes its own time to change and evolve. And it's not right to say one size would fit all, or even one size would fit two organizations. Every organization's got its own nuances, and those need to be respected and taken care of as we move along in the journey. Otherwise, people tend to fall off, and that's not what we wanted. Uh, this is a slide that it's a very rich slide. Sorry, it gives you a lot of numbers here. But what I'm trying to say here is that uh, there was a lot of work that got done. The volumes, of course, speak for themselves. We had close to 12,000 QCC projects completed on the ground. We had over 5,000 yellow beds. We had over 90 green beds. We had about 16,000 ideas submitted by people. Out of that, about 10,000 odd got approved. Of course, I spoke about the QA framework. I spoke about the NPD framework. But we also started to, look at mapping our processes and mapping our SOPs and standardizing, of course, our ways of working. Now, obviously, this can't happen without support and without guidance, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But we were supported by very, very senior, respectable guides from India and from Japan for 6 to 7 years for this to actually come to life. So, and most importantly, of course, all our employees who came forward and participated. Now, I just want to share two examples here of things that we did. So, I talk about policy management very briefly. So, our policy management started off with, we took this term BHAGs from Build to Last, the very popular book I'm sure some of you read already by Jim Collins and Jerry Porras. Talk about big, hairy, audacious goals, and we broke them up into 5-year journeys. We had two sets of BHAGs over 10 years. And the good thing about our BHAGs was that we made them as a result of informed choices, uh, getting from our customers, from employees, our partners, and of course the industry standards and technologies that were evolving. Further ahead, we broke these up into annual building blocks. Okay, we want to achieve number X on ABC metric by so and so year. So therefore, in the first year, this is the element of that what I will set for myself. And these annual building blocks, uh, coupled with input from the analysts every year, inputs from all the functions every year, and from our customers, of course, and from the board, would then form the company policy or the CEO's goal sheet for the year. Now, once the CEO's goal sheet has been formed for the year, uh, we've obviously made sure that we've taken input from all the possible places. It's linked to our BHAGs, which in the next slide we'll talk about how it's linked to the vision as well. Now, it's important to cascade this properly into the organization, because having a goal sheet for the CEO is obviously not going to solve the problem. We have to make it happen on the ground. And that's the next slide. Really, we talk about how we cascaded the goals in the organization using the typical catchball process that TQM promotes. And it was very, very effective for us. It made sure that anybody who was doing anything in the company or had on his goal sheet was always pointing toward what the CEO was trying to get. And what the CEO was trying to get was actually the BHAGs. And the BHAGs were talking to our company vision. So this connection was very, very important. And if you ask anybody who's experienced a Deming Prize examination, they will tell you how much emphasis is laid on making this connection stronger and stronger. Because if this connection is not there, well, the orchestra doesn't play the way you'd like it to. So this was one a very positive thing that we focused on and were able to make impactful for our organization. The second thing that I want to talk about, and I'm just looking at the time as well, is our daily management. Now, we said daily management is for everybody. And by everybody, we mean people who want to make sure that they are able to look at their goal sheets very, very carefully and see what they're tracking uh, on their goal sheet actually is feeding what they have to get as part of their monthly targets. Now, what happens when you look at your goal sheet at the end of the month is that it's a reactive thing. You look at your goal sheet and you say, "Oh God, I missed this target," and then but then there's something that can be done upfront. So we started looking at processes that were feeding those goals, and because we had strengthened our process framework to a large extent, we were able to look at critical metrics in the process, which, if tracked early, would make sure the goal at the end of the month is met. So if we were able to track that RWM metric on a weekly basis, we were doing gap analysis on a weekly basis and taking corrective actions on a weekly basis, and therefore not being met by ugly surprises at the end of the month and therefore at the end of the year. So this was a very strong, bond that developed over time. And of course, we automated this and realized, at the end of the year that the first year of adoption that 60-70% of our workforce works on the ground, and many of their goals are very common. They're common in nature. They don't have to have varied goals. So we actually went a step forward and automated and standardized some of those goals. And we had a system in which we'd send them automated targets for each week, and they would report back through a smart app how they were performing and what corrective actions they've done. And these would then lead to QCC projects. When I spoke about 16,000 QCC projects done, it was the outcome of these RWMs that were being implemented. So it was being owned by people on the ground. Now that is a, a very quick summary of our journey, and of course not complete without talking about the outcomes. So as you can see, our customer satisfaction went up. Of course, you see that last year has gone down because we had an acquisition, a big one at that, and that almost doubled the size of our company. And in normal cases, when you have an acquisition, you do tend to see a slight dip in customer satisfaction levels. Of course, after that, the graph continued to move upwards. But this is the graph up to 2020. And of course, employee satisfaction went up, partner satisfaction went up, and of course, network stability improved drastically. Of course, you see the last 2 years is a minor dip here, but that's more because of Facebook force major issues and not so much because of internal operations. We were the fifth company globally from the service sector to have received the Deming Prize. And it was a matter of great pride for us because we were the first company from India to have received that prize from the service sector anyway. And of course, this was a result of partnership across all departments. And I will not go through the slide in detail, but as you can see, every CXO had a role to play in certain areas of making sure this happens. And I think when you do TQM, it has to come from the heart. It can't be a paper exercise. So everybody believed in it, they were trained in it, they learned about it, and they owned it. And that's what brought the whole thing together. So it was a very, very powerful, team building exercise as well over years that helped us power through this and get to where we got to. And like I said, every journey of this kind is always guided by experts. And we were fortunate to be guided by two great people whose pictures I want to put here. And one of them is on the call, Mr. Ramanathan, Mr. Dr. Yamada, Dr. Shu Yamada, and Mr. N. Ramanathan, pillars of strength for our journey. And obviously, the best that we could ask for when it came to knowing and learning about TQM. They were very hard taskmasters, and we like to believe we were good students as well. And I think the journey was collaborative. It was extremely engaging, very enjoyable, and most of all, full of learnings for all of us. So I'd like to, say a big thanks once again to Dr. Shuyamada and to Mr. Ramanathan for all the support that they provided us. Thank you. And that really concludes the first part of my slide, which was my slide, which was the bulk of what I wanted to share. But then, how does this dovetail into education? That's important. So I have a slide on lessons that we learned, and then we talk about how it dovetails into education. And I know I've got 10 more minutes to go, so I'll try and finish in that time. What we learned. So let's talk about what we thought vis-a-vis what we learned. So we thought quality was a department. That's how it was set up initially. And we realized later on that if it's not everybody's responsibility, it can't last for too long. So at the end of the journey, quality became everybody's responsibility. Every department had their own quality goals in place. We were having this inclination. We were thinking that there was going to be a lot of resistance to change. And over time, we realized that the moment we began to pull people and clarified the purpose of doing this, our engagement on TQM went up, and people wanted to get involved in the journey. And it was a game changing process in the head when it came to change management. Big lesson learned there. Then another thing that I think many companies have this problem, and it's natural for it to be there. We look at defects as being a bad thing, and many times, when we get reprimanded for causing a defect, uh, we begin to start hiding defects, and that is the worst thing that can happen to any company, in my view. I think red flags should be encouraged, and that's something we started doing. And the philosophy being that, of course, raising a red flag is not a problem. Well, creating a red flag sometimes can be a problem, but the first time it's okay. If we cause a red flag, also learning in it, we rectify and we move on. Of course, causing red flags over and over again is not something we like to propagate. But raising a red flag by all means is something to be encouraged. And when we solve for that, metrics drive improvements. We talked about metrics a lot. That's a nice buzzword to have. But if you don't have metrics being driven alongside a purpose and doing proper gap analysis and problem solving, metrics alone cannot define the success. And of course, along with metrics, we talk about baseline, we talk about targets. I've seen graphs which are standalone lines, which Mr. Ramanathan always pointed out as meaningless because it didn't have a target. And I can't forget that, because now when I look at a graph and I say, okay, where's the target? Then I know if we're actually performing better or worse than the target. So metrics alone need to be looked at with a lot more, common sense and science, and then it helps us drive improvements. Another big notion that we learned early was this management by targets. I'll give you a target, you please go and deliver it, come which way or the other. That's wrong. That's normally not effective. I don't say it's wrong, but it's not as effective as we'd like it to be. It sometimes leads to not very good practices as well, because then people get their targets, but we don't really know how they got there. The second thing about this is that uh, you may achieve a target this year, but for somebody who's studied the four-student model, the next year there's no guarantee you'll get to that target. There's got to be some collaboration in planning those targets and then co-achieving them and co-creating them. And trainings, I think many a times we look at trainings as a tick in the box. Trainings are extremely, extremely critical, and we learned that early when we started to send our people to GSE for their learnings. And it's only when you start to practice what you learn in the training that the whole package comes together. So these were some of the lessons that we learned amongst many others, which I don't have space to put here. But I can tell you with conviction that the Deming Prize journey was a mindset shift, not only for me personally, but for a lot of our employees, including our leadership. And people were talking about it in very different ways, the way they would like to conduct business after the Deming Prize journey concluded. And like I said, it doesn't conclude, it starts once you get the prize. Okay, so now how does this relate to education? So the interesting thing is that last year was the first time that a school got the Deming Prize. The first time ever in the history of Deming. There's a school called GIIS in Japan, which got the Deming Prize. And interestingly, the gentleman who led, well, Dr. Shu Yamada, who was our sensei, along with Mr. Ramanathan, Dr. Shu Yamada also was their sensei. And when they were starting their journey early, when we just concluded getting a Deming Prize, I remember having a call with them, and they were extremely curious to understand how to adopt some of the practices. And I was delighted to see that last year they got the Deming Prize, after all the hard work that they put in. And I had a word, of course, with Dr. Yamada, and I was in touch. So then I spoke to the lady who led the journey for them, Nina Shakti Kumar, very intelligent, very sharp lady based out of Japan, and very passionate about the subject as well. And of course, I spoke to a few other education friends from the education space, and came across certain areas that I felt were niche for education. What I realized was that these areas, despite being niche for education, can be solved through common techniques that we used in solving our problems in the telecom sector. So I just have a couple of more slides to talk about that. Some of the things that we came across were, uh, unpredictable outcomes. And as the verbiage goes, no matter how we deliver the services, the result is not as we desire because there's too many human handoffs. Then there's this challenge about aligning multiple departments, which This is all coming from people who I've spoken to from the education industry. Then this is about late detection. For example, a student is uh, not performing to the levels that we would like him or her to, but by the time we get to the exam, it's too late. How do we start early detection programs for students to be able to see where the failure can potentially happen and how we can make early interventions? Then there was some cases, international schools, where they are international English schools, but then 60% of the people coming there are actually non-English speaking natives, which is another challenge because there's so much of variation amongst the learning abilities of people in a certain language. So there were things that we could do in that space. Then there was cycle time issues that came up, which were around how much time is spent creating lessons and how much time is spent actually imparting those lessons. So some of these things began to emerge, and I kind of mapped it back to that initial slide I showed you, in which we looked at our challenges and our mitigation measures we put in place, and I realized it looks very similar. So I wanted to share that slide with you, and then one example which I found very interesting. After which I will conclude my talk and open it up for questions. This slide is what I was talking about. So I spoke about 4 or 5 different challenges that the education industry faces, and this is how they did or they potentially can mitigate. So the human factor variability was mitigated to a large extent using daily management. Some speaker I spoke. Aligning of departments was to a large extent fixed because they adopted policy management and started to do cross departmental problem solving. Late detection. They started the early detection system using daily management again. So there was the example I gave about a process and the critical steps in that process being detected early, tracked early. This is exactly what they did, and they had good results there as well. Uh, there were some language-based challenges that I spoke of about non-English speaking people. Again, there was early support that came in for students to make sure the learning is done in a manner which is easier for them to understand. And cycle time, of course, there's numerous Kaizen examples that I've come across, uh, whether it's called under the TQ umbrella or otherwise, numerous examples where I've heard from people from the education industry and from educational institutions where they've done improvement projects on reducing the cycle time, including automation and nowadays, of course, AI, which is a big contributor as well to the solution. So suffice to say, TQM is industry agnostic. It is a concept when done well, applies to every industry that I can think of. And coming from the service industry, when I know that most companies before us have come from the manufacturing industry, I know it works. I know it works in all kinds of environments, and we've seen 2 examples here today as well, which were non-manufacturing. And the last slide here, which I found very interesting, was a QCC project, which was done by the students. And interestingly, it was done on the excessive usage of smartphone. So students in the school made QCC quality control circles amongst themselves, and they started to solve for this problem. They realized the problem is there, and as kids we use a lot of smartphones, and they came out with innovative solutions on how to reduce that. And the good thing about this project was that it's a project that can be done every year because the students keep passing out. And as new batches keep coming in, fresh minds keep coming in, fresh insights keep coming in, and it just keeps the whole thing so refreshed. So imagine the people, the kids who are creating the problems are also solving for these problems. So that is the end of my slide. I've finished my 45 minutes. I will stop sharing here. And Ray, it's back to you for any Q&A that might be there.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Uday. Um, we are now open to any of the questions that you have from the audience. I can see in here, Ram. I can see Ram in your presentation. So thank you so much, Ram, for being
Ray,
instrumental.
if you don't mind, can I request Mr. Ramanathan, since he's here, to just say a few words because he was such an important part of this journey, and I'm privileged to have him here on this call. Before we go to the Q&A,
Absolutely, absolutely.
so you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, please go on unmute, Ram. There.
Thank you, Dave. I enjoyed your presentation, and thank you, Ray, for asking me a question or asking me to speak. Um, I actually came into helping Indus Towers a bit late in the day for them. Dr. Yamada was the one who was helping them for a very, very long time. But my time, since it was short, I made it very intensive, and I think I gave them a lot of trouble to get ready for the Deming examination. My contribution was mainly to prepare them for the Deming examination, and I must say that they put in an enormous amount of effort and gave it the sense of urgency. They had, from the CEO down, all the right principles. They believed in these principles. They were people friendly. They were customer friendly. So those points were already there. And what one had to do was to make sure that all this was holding together. But after the Deming Prize, also for a year and a half or so, we continued the journey. And then there was a complete change in terms of ownership and so on. And you know what happens when the ownership of a company changes and a merger took place with another and so on. And then Uday decided that he'll find his career in England. And so he's now in London, I believe. So yes, it was a very enjoyable journey and great contributions from Uday and team. He built up a great team to work with them and work with them to make all these things happen at great speed. And it's not easy. They had about 2,500 permanent employees and about 10 or 12,000 contract employees who were manning the 125,000 odd towers. So it was not an easy task at all. The sheer logistics were mind-boggling. And Uday and his team got it done in a very quick time. That's it.
Thank you so much for that, Ram. Really inspiring. Any questions from our audience?
Ray,
By
this
the
is
way,
Lakshmikant.
please go ahead, Lax.
Yeah, it's not a question, but I just want to compliment Uday for the reason I'll tell you that. In 2018, few Deming Award companies had made a presentation in Pune. And at Tata's, we were just starting our Deming TQM journey, actually. So I had an opportunity to attend that particular session where Uday and Shekhar Asgaonkar, they presented their presentations regarding their TQM journey. And why I was very much interested in Uday's presentation at that point of time and today also is that Uday's company was a service provider, whereas we were a manufacturing company. So in transactional processes, how TQM is implemented, I was very much keen to observe that. So I attended that in 2018. And now still, even though we are in touch now over the internet and all those things or LinkedIn, I wanted to attend this also. And I compliment Uday for actually drawing parallel lines between the service industry, that is telecom, and the education industry, education system for this particular thing. And that was a real takeaway for me in this particular today's session by Uday. And thank you very much for that, Uday.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lax. There's a question, Uday. A lot of quality management in universities tends to focus on accreditation, documentation, and compliance. How can institutions shift the conversation from quality assurance as compliance to quality? I mean, conversation from quality assurance as compliance to quality as continuous improvement of student learning experience.
Yeah, this is a very pertinent point, and thanks for asking this question. Whoever asked it. See, I think they go hand in hand. It's important to have adequate documentation, but it's also important to have it in conjunction with an outcome-oriented approach. So, ticking off the boxes is always nice as long as ticking off the boxes is leading to some real actions which are impacting our customers on the ground. So, one should be mindful of that and keep that balance, in my view. So, whenever we are doing a paper exercise, which is compliance related or uh, anything else which looks like we need to say we've done this and we've done this, we should look at that in conjunction with the impact that's happening on the ground. And if that impact is not there, perhaps we should pause and stop and take some perspective of how we should be going about doing that. So to me, it's all the impact that it has on the Gemba more than the work that you do in the office.
Thank you for that, Uday. There's a comment right here from Hisam. Thank you very much, Uday. Great journey, great achievements with great lessons. Good luck. I wish you and your committed colleagues all success. Congratulations. You highlighted, Uday, the Global Indian International School in Tokyo, right? Becoming the first and only school to win the Deming Prize in 2025. Do you think this represents a turning point for TQM in education? What should other education institutions learn from this development?
I think it does because what I'm now seeing is more and more service sector companies coming forward and embracing TQM as a concept. And interestingly, many of them are from India. And recently we saw the number of companies getting the Deming Prize have actually, the number from India has gone ahead of the number in Japan, which is actually amazing. So there's a lot of interest that's being generated in the service industry. And I think the GIIS, by getting the Deming Prize, have actually shown the way for education to open their gates to learnings from TQM. And like I said, TQM applies, it is industry agnostic. It is a myth that applies only to the manufacturing industry. TQM is for everybody, every industry. And in fact, I would extend by saying TQM is even for personal individuals. You can put those practices to use even in your personal life. So yes, to answer your question, it does open up the gates and provides inspiration for others to look at on similar lines as GIS has got that in place.
Thank you for that, Uday. You identify human factor variability as a challenge when it comes to education and standardization as part of the response. But education also values teacher autonomy and academic freedom. How do we standardize what needs to be standardized without standardizing creativity and that learning experience itself?
That's a great point, Ray. Thank you for bringing it up. I think they both have to go hand in hand. We cannot kill innovation at the cost of standardization, and we cannot kill standardization at the cost of innovation. Both have their place, and how I see it is that they're both complementing each other very well. So when we innovate, we create something new, and for that something new to be impregnated into the system, we have to have standards. Otherwise, that thing that we have created will take all shapes and forms, some of them which we've not designed it for, if we don't standardize the way we implement it. So it's a combination of both coming together and making a magic happen.
Say for that, Uday. If a university president or school leader came to you tomorrow and said, "We want to begin a TQM journey," what are the first 2 to 3 things you would advise them to do?
The first thing I would ask them is, why do you want to do TQM? And sometimes the conversation stops right there. I've had people come and ask me, we would like to embark on a TQM journey. And many times they've gone back disappointed because they're not able to answer that question carefully. And if they do answer that question carefully, the next step is your leadership convinced it is the right path to take? And if those two questions, the answer is yes, then I think there is a lot more to do. The third question then would be, okay, what are your problems? And then we decide accordingly how do we approach it. Because TQM, like I said, it provides a lot of flexibility. It's the correct and the apt usage of TQM, which or the incorrect usage of TQM, which sometimes gives it a bad name. TQM itself is a beautiful tool. It's not a tool. It's a way of working, the way companies get run. And if the only challenge is you've got to make sure you adopt it carefully under the guidance of senior senseis like Mr. Ramanathan and Dr. Yamada, you'll definitely get success. That's a long answer to your short question. Sorry.
Thank you for that. I love the first one. Clarity is very important on why we need to go to, embark on that journey. There's a question in here from Dr. Tejaswini. Hello, this is Dr. Tejaswini from Sankara IA Foundation. How did you sustain TQM when there was a change in leadership or key champions who had driven the Deming journey?
It is extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult, and let me not mince words here. See, the point is that, with due respect to everybody, every leader who comes in comes with their own set of ideas. They've got their own experiences. They've got their own ways in which they'd like to drive things. And sometimes leaders who are not aligned to TQM or understand TQM would have come with another approach, which sometimes, by the way, ends up being similar to TQM, but ends up being called something else many a times. So if you really want to make sure this effect is lasting enough, you got to look at companies like Toyota, who've been doing this for years and years and years. And I remember going to the Toyota factory, by the way, and one of us asked that question there, that how do you incentivize your people to innovate? And there was a brief laughter, and then the answer then was, we don't pay people to innovate. We don't incentivize people to innovate. They come to office to innovate. It's part of their regular job. So that's the level of culture that Toyota's reached, and that evolution is a long and hard one. But so sustaining it is extremely critical. But sometimes sustaining it can be challenging because of various reasons, including change of leadership, where there is no wrong or right. The new leader is coming with the right intentions, but may not have had the exposure to TQM, which is fair. And that's how sometimes I've seen companies fall a little short of where they were earlier in the TQM journey.
Thank you for that, Uday. There's another question in here from Raul. Thank you for all of your support, Raul. Thank you for always attending the webinars. Thank you, Uday. Impressive presentation, both experiences. Question: what would the CEO's lessons learned be? Same as the ones you presented, or any other very special ones for him?
The CEO's lessons learned, I think the biggest lesson learned for the CEO from this kind of a journey is there are two things. One is how much are we able to continue the culture of improving? Because many a times, seen companies after they get the prize, it's almost like we've achieved what we had to, and then things tend to fall back in place, not in place, but out of place, as they were, 10 years, 8 years, 9 years back. So the first lesson for any CEO would be to make sure this journey sustains itself. And it actually feeds into the question that was asked previously on why do companies fail, right? So this to me is critical. And the second is any new people joining the company, especially at the leadership level, must be thoroughly inducted into the ways of working. Otherwise, that dilution can be very, very quick. The more senior the person, in my view, the more strong the induction should be. Because the more senior the person, the more strong he or she would come with in terms of their own views of bringing in things. And many times then, despite meaning well, end up diluting what has already been created with a lot of effort and sweat and toil. So these are two things that I think I would advise any CEO to keep in mind when on this journey.
Thank you for that. Last question from our audience. What did you do to ensure that teams did not become complacent after achieving the Deming Prize and that the improvement culture continued?
Part of that was answered by Mr. Ramanathan. We asked him to keep coming to our office and ask all those difficult questions for the next 2 years. But the beauty about TQM and the Deming Prize is that when the examiners come, they come and challenge you, and they ask all the difficult questions, which sometimes wake you up. So that, oh, I missed this and I missed that, because the examiners who come are very, very well read people. They come from a place of solid knowledge, and they come from a place of solid practical experience. So, and the good thing about Deming is that 3 years after you've got the Deming Prize, they come and do a review for you. And of course, there's a small fees that you pay for it, but that makes sure that, and it's by design, I think, I'm not sure, but I think that this review is done because they want to make sure that whatever you've received on the day of the Deming Prize as recognition is continued to be practiced for the next 3 years. And if you do it for 3 years, unless you do something really crazy, it's not easy to let go of some of those practices because they've now been embedded into your system.
Thank you very much, Uday, and for that insightful and thought-provoking session. If you can give a round of applause to Uday at this point, let's give him all of the emojis that you have in there. So today's discussion definitely reminds us that excellence is not simply an award or a destination. It is a culture built through leadership, discipline systems, continuous improvement, and the commitment of people across the organization. So the lessons from the Deming Prize journey really offer us valuable insights, not only for businesses, but also for the schools and universities seeking to strengthen quality and organizational effectiveness. On behalf of the International Academy for Quality, thank you so much, Uday, for generously sharing your experience and your insights. And thank you to everyone from around the world who joined us today. This will be uploaded on IAQ's YouTube channel, that will also be shared right there on LinkedIn, as well as via email and also on Facebook. So we hope you leave this session inspired to continue building a culture of excellence in your own organization. Once again, I'm Ray. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you, Uday.
Thank you, Ray.
everybody.
Thank you.